It's September 24th, and I'm going to talk about the form of torture that was used against me and my son on Met House Street, right after we had this strange incidence of being hit by something that caused both of us to throw up, and ended up with our being in the emergency room. And I certainly wouldn't have gone to the emergency room if we had both been, had a weird 24-hour flu, but it definitely was not that. Didn't feel like that. It was both of us at the exact same time. I don't know too many people who have, one person might throw up and then the other one starts to vomit. Typically doesn't occur within 1 minute or 2 minutes of each other or less. A few seconds, and all of a sudden you're both throwing up. And not in that kind of a violent way, and not after having a strange sort of compression feeling in the apartment. So it was not a normal situation. The other thing that precipitated that, or that occurred before the next form of torture, was that the only person that I had really continued having conversations with over the phone from Oregon was Krista Schneider. And I already had a feeling, since I had been in Oregon already, that she was giving information to someone about me and working against me, kind of working as a spy for people who were my enemies and really were doing a lot of harm. Not just not just winning information, but doing very serious harm. And I basically had suspicions, and I already had an idea, which is why I started to kind of guard what I was doing in Oregon a little bit. And by the time I was in Oregon and trying to find out the origin of my migraines, I gave her false information because I knew that she was giving information to someone. So if I gave her false information, she'd pass that along. And I could figure out how to track and find out who was responsible for doing these different things. And I've already talked about how I discovered my migraines were triggered by the military or Department of Defense in some way. The other thing that I have not well, there are a couple of other things that I guess I could go back to that would reference Krista and Schneider and who she knew and different things. But basically, and I do need to talk about I did mention my court cases and how I discovered my migraines were being triggered then in Washington State when they filed court cases against me to quote-unquote ban me from these hospitals. So the exact same thing that was done to me in Oregon was then being done to me in Washington. And in that case, I was trying to show up for hearings, and the judges were not even giving me, they were actually refusing to give me additional time. I would ask them for accommodation for quote-unquote disabilities, which, my migraines were so severe they were disabling. And the judges were refusing to give me additional time, or to excuse the fact that I couldn't show up for court one day because I had migraines. And in the meantime, I had these adversarial law firms already knowing I'm sure that a couple of them, some of them knew what was triggering my migraines, and that it was real. And yet they were using this to their advantage and mocking me and making fun of me to the judge, saying, oh, she's just making it up. They always knew that I was never making it up. So I was not even able to attend the court matters in Washington State in Wenatchee for the same reason that I had been pushed out of my lawsuits in Oregon. They were using migraines to keep me out of court. And because I had these court hearings, I couldn't take my son with me to all of the hearings, and I had to have somebody babysit him, like my grandma. And that was really unfair to him. At one of the hearings, another wife of another trooper or cop who works in the for the district county. It's not Judge Alicia Nakata, it's Nancy Harmon. She had a very serious conflict of interest. And the first time she basically acknowledged it and stepped down and acknowledged she had a conflict of interest. And that was after she harassed me for bringing my son to court with me, and she mocked my son in the courtroom. And when I asked her to recuse herself the next time, she did, but then after I was being kicked back over from Canada after I was tortured, I think she thought that she no longer had to follow any of the laws. She didn't even need to accuse herself. She didn't have to worry about any conflict of interest because nobody believed anything that I said, because she was certain that everybody thought I was totally nuts. I had no money, and they had worked very hard at creating a mental illness for me that didn't even exist to cover up for some of the torture and the horrible things that they were doing. So Nancy Harmon, I looked into her background as well, and of course she's married to a police officer. And you know, the police officers in that area were obviously, as I've described, not working for me and my son, and had motive to be actually supporting some of their other friends that of course had salaries and money and could give them better positions with what they were doing. So I was basically tortured with these cases, and then aside from being tortured when my son was still in my womb with some kind of experimental technology when I was at that barbecue when I was 7 months pregnant, and possibly at my house later, I'm not sure, possibly. The next form of torture was then what caused us to throw up at the same time. And then after that, we went back home, and I believe it was the same night or the very next night, both my son and I were shaking, not shaking like visibly outwardly. All of the muscles in our body, both of our bodies, were twitching, and it was like a benign fasciculation. It was the kind of a creepy crawling feeling, but much worse, and like I've tried to describe it as sort of being like static electricity. And you know, if you rub your head, if you live in a very dry environment, and you rub your hand or you rub a sweater over your head many times, and then it causes your hair to stand up on end, and you can feel it, and you feel this, you can put your hand even above your hair and feel a little bit of an electrical kind of feeling from that static electricity. And then if you rub your feet across the carpet in socks maybe many times, and you build up static electricity, then you can reach over and you can touch somebody and shock them because of this static electricity that you've built up. Well, it felt like that feeling, that weird sort of feeling of static electricity is the feeling that I had in my body, and yet it was combined with another feeling of muscles, of small muscles and nerves contracting. It was more like muscles contracting all over throughout our legs and feet. And I had been hooked up to a TENS machine before, which was for physical therapy, and basically a TENS machine, you go to a physical therapist or a massage therapist, and they can put something on your neck or a certain part of your body, and then they turn it on, and after a little while, so many minutes, there's a pulse that goes to your muscle, and your muscle, it forces your muscle to contract. So your muscle is going to get very, very, very hard, and then all of a sudden it will release. And then it contracts, and then it releases. And they use this for therapy sometimes. And for therapy, what they used on me in Wenatchee and also in Portland, Oregon on one occasion, it's called a TENS machine, T-E-N-S. If you are there are other things that are very similar called EMS machines, and those can create, there's a difference in whether it stimulates the nervous system as opposed to the muscles. And what it felt like is like there was static electricity all over our legs and feet. And then it was almost like there was a TENS machine creating constant current of muscle movement under the skin. It wasn't a restless leg syndrome, it wasn't twitching, it wasn't growing pains. It was just as you, as a normal person, you can feel the difference between no static electricity and a very high level of static electricity. And, you know, you could say to somebody next to you, I feel static electricity. And as many times as somebody says, you're imagining it. Or, no, it's not really happening, it's in your head. It really doesn't matter what that person is saying is in your head, because you know that you can feel it. And maybe you can't see it, but you can definitely feel it, and you know that it's not that your body is overheating. It's not from a natural cause. You know that it's not that your body got overheated and now you're letting off a lot more heat after you exercised or something. You know that the origin is something different. It's a form of electricity. It's a kind of current or whatever. Even though it's a very mild and not and it's not harmful. Well, for me and my son, what was happening to us was very harmful. And it was definitely not a physical problem that either one of us had. We definitely didn't have food poisoning. There were no chemicals on the premises or the property. I had no fertilizers. I didn't even clean with cleaning solutions around my son. If I cleaned, it was when he was in bed. And I used usually vinegar and water, or extremely light, or a little bit of detergent, and I used very light bleach solution sometimes to wipe down the walls, because the walls in our apartment sometimes were a little bit moldy. But mold does not cause a creepy crawling sensation in legs and feet. And all night, to the point that we couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep and my son couldn't sleep. I sat there. I thought it was just me at first. The first time it happened, I thought, oh my gosh, what is wrong? And I then, because I co-slept with my son, I felt his body next to mine, and I just touched him, and I could feel just touching his leg or touching his body, I could feel all of that current and electricity running through his body, having nothing to do with mine. And he was not, as I say, not speaking the same way around that time. And I remember that I sent an email to, by that time I had already figured out that Krista was connected to people that I hadn't expected she was connected to. And I thought that she had something to do with wanting to help someone take my child from me, because she sent all these girl baby clothes. And I had told her that I thought I was having a girl, because that's what I really had been told. So she got mad. She actually became very angry after I was bringing my son home from the hospital. And I told her it was a boy, and she, instead of acting happy, she got extremely mad. She said, "Did you know and you just didn't tell me?" She got very mad. She said, "Did you know and you didn't say anything?" And I said no, which was the truth. But why would she be so angry and upset about that? I mean, what did it matter whether I had a girl or a boy? It didn't make any difference to her. And it didn't make any difference to me. The only thing that it could have made a difference in is if somebody was expecting to take a girl home from the hospital after they tried to take my son away from me, which is what I had a feeling was happening when they were treating me the way they were at that hospital. And I think that that plan sort of backfired, because it wasn't a girl that was born, and there wasn't a waiting family for a boy. They were waiting for a girl. So she was very hostile, Krista was, about some things, and actually when this thing happened, and then she asked me at one point, before this torture began, she asked, would I prefer to die or be tortured, and what's the worst imaginable thing that I could ever have happen to me? What would be the worst form of torture I could ever endure? Which was basically like what Amy Rowe, the reporter for Willamette Week, and Basil, her friendly photographer, asked me. They asked me before they wrote this horrible